All right, welcome to our home selling webinar, everything you need to know before you sell your home. And the goals for this webinar, it's designed to help home sellers make sure they're making a smart decision when they sell. So, there's a lot that goes into selling. There's a lot of costs. There's other things like capital gains that you might not be expecting. And if you're not expecting those and you sell your home, it could be a rude awakening, right? So this is to inform you about all the things that you need to know before you make the decision. And once you make that decision, all the steps and other important details that you should know in order to make the right decision, whether you're selecting an agent, staging your home, or what repairs you would want to make to maximize the sale of your home, right? So ultimately, I'm trying to empower you to become a smarter consumer, to understand the process so you can go out there and choose the right agent for you and make sure that that whole process of selling home works out to be a success. All right, a little bit about me. My name is Vinicius Brasil. I'm a realtor here at Keller Williams. I've been selling real estate for 20 years. I've sold quite a number of homes. I can't really tell you exactly how many. Both listings and helping buyers, of course, but mainly on the listing side. I've been involved in the development of 2 single-family homes, and I've worked on hundreds of remodeling projects, whether it's kitchens, baths, landscaping, etc. I've managed rental properties, and over the course of all this time, I've had hundreds of real estate headaches, and I'm still learning. Now, here are some of the questions that we're going to answer today. I'm going to go into more depth. I'm not going to just go by this slide. So we'll look into all these and basically, hopefully cover everything that you need to know. And of course, if we have some time afterwards, I can open it up for questions. But I'm just going to try to get through this because we've got a lot of stuff to get through in that 1-hour time frame. Now, the first question, is it a good time to sell? Now, if you're watching the news right now, especially the national news, you're probably hearing things like, home values are dropping, builders are canceling contracts or getting canceled contracts, interest rates are too high, all this stuff that's maybe causing you to feel like this is a bad time to sell. Well, the reality is our local market is a little bit different than what you're going to see on the national level. Typically, our market is extremely active, right? We've got a lot of buyers that are looking in our market. Also, we typically don't have enough homes for all these buyers that are looking. And also the season of the market has a big influence on what's happening. So in other markets, when we get into the winter season, we could see the market really slowing down. In our case, our winter market is still pretty active. There's a lot of buyers looking in the winter and not a lot of homes. So potentially could make it a really good time to sell in the winter season because you don't have a lot of competition. So as for right now, the current market, obviously it's a little bit different than what we typically experience here in Silicon Valley, but we're still seeing a good amount of buyer activity. The interest rates cause things to slow down a bit, also cause prices to drop. But since the prices dropped, and that drop happened, I would say in April, May of last year, maybe June is when people really started to notice it, the market has been fairly stable, right? And even at the beginning of this year, the market's actually been very active because we don't have a lot of homes on the market right now. So that's causing more multiple offer situations because there's not a lot of good homes on the market. And as a result, home values are holding up pretty well and definitely not consistent with what you might be hearing on CNN or some of these other network news stations that are talking about the national real estate market. So is it a good time to sell? Well, it's not a terrible time to sell, right? You're not going to be able to get the prices that you could have gotten this time last year, but you're still going to be able to sell and you're not going to have to give up too many concessions or any concessions at all. So it really depends on your expectations of price and your timing and everything. But I don't think it's a bad time to sell. All right, let's go through the selling process. So you can see I've broken down the selling process into 12 steps. Now, you can consolidate these steps. You could rearrange the order. Basically, I've arranged them in 12 steps because I really want to show you all the details that go involved in getting a home ready to be put on the market, getting a home sold, and then, what happens at closing and all those details. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. The number one step is to interview agents. Now, why is this the number one step, and does it have to be the number one step? Well, of course not. You can do some other things. Some people may choose to get their home ready and then call agents. There's a number of different ways you can go about selling your house. Why I think it should be the number one step is because a good agent will help you with the other 12 steps or the other 11 steps in selling a home. In fact, a good agent will handle a lot of those steps for you. A good agent will help you identify what things you need to repair and what things you should update to maximize your price. A good agent has all those contacts already lined up. So he could help you find the right people to get the work done and even manage it for you. So there's a lot of stress, money, and time a good agent will be able to save you. So I think that's probably the best step, is to start interviewing agents, finding out what they can do, start researching and looking into these agents to make sure that their track records are consistent and they're the right agent for you. Home preparation. Now, the big question I get from a lot of sellers is, what do I need to do to get my home ready to sell? What do I need to do to maximize my home's price when I do sell? Well, there's a lot of options here. Basically, on this slide, I'm just going to break down some simplistic things, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But basically, home preparation details some things like mandatory things like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and strapping your water heater. Now, these are things that you absolutely need to have done when you sell your home. Everything else is optional, right? So, but what I recommend at the very basic level is, getting the leaks fixed if there's any leaks that are affecting your home. Making sure that you have safety issues fixed, like electrical problems that the inspectors identify. If you've got cracks in the walls, which is pretty typical if you're selling, say, in Santa Clara or some of the areas, along 101 where the expansive soils are rarely prevalent in that area, you'll want to get those repaired as well. Other updates like painting, flooring, and lighting, well, these obviously have a big effect on the sale of a home. Of course, cleaning the home, having the windows cleaned, landscape cleanup, all those details I think are really important. But when you start to get into updating or repairing kitchens and bathrooms, there's a lot of expense that goes into there, and therefore there's a lot of consideration that you need to have. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Now, inspections. Now, in this area, we typically do the inspections in advance, and this might be different than other areas that you're familiar with. Maybe you bought a home in Texas or Nevada, and you did your own inspections afterwards, after you got into contract or during the escrow period. Well, things are different here in our area. As I mentioned before, the market is extremely active here. There's a lot of buyers. In many cases, we've got multiple offers on homes. So we've learned to do these inspections in advance. And as a result, we're in a better position to select a more secure offer, and we don't waste our time with maybe choosing the wrong offer because they've come back with us and tried to negotiate or maybe canceling the deal. So the type of inspections that you're going to want to do beforehand are the property inspection, the termite inspection, and the roof inspection. And there's some other possible inspections that you may want to have, such as the chimney inspection, pool inspection, or foundation inspection. And again, I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail in a later slide, but this is another important step that we'll go through. Another critical step is the disclosures that need to be filled out. And the thing that you have to understand about disclosures, there are some mandatory disclosures that are required by the state of California anytime you're transferring property or transferring the sale of a property. Things like the transfer disclosure statement, the natural hazard statement, and then also, of course, things like the mold disclosure, and then the lead-based paint disclosure. Now, those are mandatory, but there's also additional disclosures that you may want to provide. And these are usually disclosures that are designed by the real estate associations. And your realtor will go over, or should be going over, these disclosures with you. Again, we'll get into more detail on disclosures in a later slide. Of course, marketing and staging, things like you'll want, consider professional staging for the home, photographs, making sure you're taking very sharp, bright, clear photographs. You may want to offer a 3D tour, a video tour. There's things like drone photography. You may want to have a property website that ties all these details together to make sure that the buyers that are looking at your property can see all the available information about your property. And of course, you'll want to syndicate all this information on websites like Zillow, Realtor.com, and Redfin. You'll of course want to make sure that the property is posted on the MLS, and there's other places that you can have your property advertised, such as YouTube, Google, or perhaps even Facebook. The listing. So once you've got all the marketing done, the home is staged, the home has been prepped, your property is going to be put on the MLS. You can have a broker tour scheduled. There'll be links from all that marketing I was referring to earlier on the MLS, so buyers will know how to access that. Agents will put a lockbox on the home to make sure that other agents can show it. And of course, they'll be managing the coordinating, or all those agents showing requests, right? And then open houses. So step 7, typically that first weekend is going to be the busiest weekend once that property hits the market. So what you'll normally see is agents will schedule open houses on a Saturday and Sunday for that first weekend. And those open houses will be somewhere between 1 and 4 p.m. When we get later hours where there's more light, that might change from maybe 2 to 5 or 1:30 to 4:30. But typically open houses will be around 3 hours long, right? Agents will go out and promote the open houses to the neighborhood. They'll post the open houses on social media, maybe send out an email blast to their buyer database and also agents that they know. And of course, they'll want to record or get registration information from the visitors so they can then follow up. And that brings us to step 8, where after the open houses have been done, typically, let's say on a Monday morning, they're going to start following up with all those contacts that they've met over the open house, as well as other agents that have shown the property, and try to gauge what the level of interest is so they can decide whether or not there's enough interest to set an offer date. And of course, number 9 is that offer date. So once agents have followed up and determined that they're going to be receiving some offers, they'll communicate to all the interested parties that an offer date has been set. And then as a result, that's the day that the offers will come in. Once they've collected all the offers, they'll present their offers to their clients. And at that point, you'll be able to decide if there's going to be some negotiation, maybe some sort of counter offers that go in. And at the end of the day, what you hope to do is find a good offer and perhaps accept and get into contract with that particular buyer. Then once we get into contract, we open up escrow. The following day is when we would expect to get the earnest money for the buyer. That's the deposit that they'll be making. And what escrow will do at that point is start to facilitate the paperwork for closing. So there'll be some information sent out to you as a seller that you'll need to start filling out. And then during that whole escrow period, there's a lot of communication going back and forth just to make sure that the seller is updated on the status and what's happening with the buyer. And then at some point, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks before closing, they'll coordinate a signing where you'll go down to the escrow company, or there'll be an agent sent to you and you'll sign the escrow paperwork. We do that prior to closing. There are some states that require the signing to be handled on the day of closing, but here in California, that's all handled several days prior to closing, and you're authorizing escrow to close the transaction on your behalf. And then lastly, on closing, prior to closing, the buyers are most likely going to want to do a walkthrough where they come to the property to verify the condition of the property, making sure there wasn't any undisclosed or concealed damage from maybe staging, or if you as a seller or occupying the property. Perhaps there's some damage underneath a bed or underneath a rug that they weren't aware of or that wasn't disclosed. So this is their opportunity to come through the house one last time, get a look at the home completely vacant, and make sure that everything is in acceptable condition, right? So once the walkthrough is done, we or your agent will be confirming the closing date, making sure that there's no delays, and then notifying the seller of all the important milestones that the buyers reach, such as the buyer's loan docs reaching title, them signing, the loan being funded, and then eventually the transaction being recorded and closed. Also confirming that you've got your proceeds in your bank account, and then reminding the sellers that you need to cancel your utilities and then cancel insurance policies on the property. And then lastly, step 12, this is another step that may or may not apply. Obviously, we'll transfer occupancy of the home to the new buyer by giving them the keys. In some cases, you as a seller might still be residing on the property. You might have what's referred to as a rentback, where you're going to be staying in the property maybe for 30 days up to potentially 60 days. And if that's the case, then of course, a deposit will be collected. Once you vacate, the buyer would then do another walkthrough just to make sure that everything's in good shape. And then we would facilitate that process, or your agent would facilitate that, and then make sure that the deposit is returned back to you. All right, that is the selling process pretty much in a nutshell, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on some of those things. But the next thing that we should talk about is, will you have to be paying capital gains? Now, this is really important. This is probably something that should be talked about even before you even think about the selling process, because a lot of people aren't aware of capital gains and how extensive they can be. So, capital gains on a primary residence are different than the capital gains that you might be expecting from selling other investments, right? For starters, you have to understand what a primary residence is. So the primary residence is a home that you've lived in 2 of the last 5 years, right? So most likely if you're selling your home, that's considered your primary residence. But if you've only owned that home for a year, it still doesn't qualify as a primary residence under IRS rules, right? So the government, the federal government and the state government will give you an exemption of a certain amount that you can apply towards the gain that you've made. That exemption is in the form of $250,000 if you're a single individual, or $500,000 if you're married, right? So how do you calculate capital gains? Well, let's look at this example here. We've got a sale price of $1.5 million, right? First, we have to look at our basis, and your basis is pretty much going to be your purchase price. Now, sometimes the basis can be different than what your purchase price is. Say perhaps that you purchased this home with your spouse, and say your spouse passed away maybe 5 years ago. Well, if that's the case, then there's a good chance, and most likely, the way you held title on that property would enable that property to have what's referred to as a stepped-up basis. So when your spouse had passed away, the property would be reassessed and the basis would be raised to the value of the home at the point that your spouse passed away. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to say that the basis is the purchase price. In this example, it's $100,000. Now, let's say the closing cost of when you originally purchased that home was $5,000. And let's say the closing costs when you sold it, including commissions and other closing costs, is going to be around $75,000. We'll factor in also improvements that you made. Now, these could be improvements where maybe you did an addition, maybe you remodeled the kitchen, real improvements to the home, not maintenance items, right? And again, you might need to clarify with your CPA as to whether certain things will qualify as an improvement or not. But basically anything that improves the house, I believe, would be considered an improvement. So you add those together and you add your exemption, which in this case we're going to assume is $500,000 for a married couple, and your capital gain is going to be a total of $750,000. Now, what would you pay on a capital gain of $750,000? Well, we're going to look at the IRS capital gains tax rates. And you can see they vary here depending upon your status and, of course, depending upon the amounts, right? So in this case, you can see if we look at the married filing jointly category, up to $80,000, you don't pay any federal tax for capital gains on your primary residence. But then from $80,000 to $500,000, you pay 15%, and anything above $500,000 or $501,000, you're going to pay 20%. Now we're going to look at the California capital gains tax rates, and you can see they've got a much more detailed breakdown that starts as early as 1% for the first $17,000, and then goes all the way down to 12, or all the way up, I should say, to 12% for anything over $1.2 million, and quite a bit in between, right? Now, these capital gains tax rates, they change every year, and in fact, taxes are changing all the time, and they typically, when there's a new administration for the federal government, they do revamp the tax code. So there's a lot of things that are being considered now that might be passed and may change the tax rates in the next year or so. So in this $750,000 example, I broke down what the state capital gains taxes will look like for the various percentages. And you can see the total amount for a $750,000 capital gain, their state liability would be about $66,000. And then here's the federal capital gains liability, and that's going to be about $113,000. So you can see if you add those together, you're looking at about $180,000 in capital gains, and that's why it's so important to understand what your capital gain is going to be before you sell your house, assuming that you need that money to then, put into another property, right? You've got to know what that is, because if it's your primary residence, they won't collect that in advance. That'll be something that you need to factor to make sure that you'll pay in the next calendar year for your tax liability. So if you sell your home in 2022 and you had a $750,000 capital gain, then when you file your 2023 taxes, when you sell in 2023, when you file your 2023 taxes, you're going to be expected to pay that $180,000. Now, how do commissions work? So, moving from capital gains to commissions, now we see that commissions is what you pay your agent and what is also advertised on the MLS to the agent that represents the buyer on the purchase of the house. Now, there's really just one commission that you're charged, and that's something that you negotiate with your listing agent. And that commission is generally then split and advertised to the MLS to the agent representing the buyer. Now, it doesn't have to be split equally. The split is determined when you fill out the listing agreement, okay? I do have a great video that breaks down all the details about real estate commissions. And of course, after this video, after this webinar, I'm going to go ahead and follow up with an email, and I'll include links to some of these videos as well as a link to this webinar. Now, how much commission should you be paying? Well, there really is no standard or set commission. So commissions can be completely negotiated between you and your agent. Now, typically in our area, we see commissions all over the place. They could be as low as, say, 3.5%, maybe 3% on a very extreme case. But typically what we're seeing is something like 4, 5, and 6%, right? And that's the total commission. And of course, that's going to be split between the buyer and seller agents, right? So agents will charge based on their model and what fee of, what they feel their service is worth. Some agents will market themselves as full service, and they provide a lot of other services like staging. They might help you fix up the house, and all that is going to translate into what they believe is their value, right? And you also have to take into account what buyer agents expect to be compensated at. And typically in our marketplace, the buyers agents are being compensated at around 2.5%. It's rare that I see anything below 2.5%. And I don't know that it's really necessary for you to offer anything above 2.5%. But also keep in mind that this is something that you can also negotiate, and it has to be determined on the listing agreement. Now here's an example of our commission model, and every agent does this differently. There's flat fee brokers out there. There's agents that, of course, that have their own ways of charging. But we, my group, the Brasil group, we take into account the value of the property and the level of work and service needed. So if we're providing things like staging, fixing up the house, all that stuff, that's going to involve more work and, of course, more expense, right? Our listing commission can vary, as low as 1% and go as high as 3%. And again, that's going to depend on the value of the property that we're selling and the service that we provide. And there's, 5 different ways that we typically can sell a house, right? Sometimes people just want to get their house sold, and we can get them an instant, cash offer, or put them in touch directly with the buyer that we may have. We also have like full service, listings where we put it on the MLS, right? We can do that as low as 1% if there isn't a lot of work and the value of the home is quite high. We have what's called like the complete selling solution, where it starts at 1.5% and goes up depending upon the amount of work needed, and again, the value of the property, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of different things that we can do, and there's different, schedules or charges for each one of them. All right, selling costs. What are they and who pays what? So typically your seller costs are going to consist of 3 main things. They're going to consist of escrow fees, title insurance, and transfer tax, right? So I'll break down some of these costs. So escrow fee is what you pay the escrow company to manage the transaction or make sure that they're providing their service. The title insurance, now this is typically something that's required if you're getting a loan or the buyer is getting a loan. And depending on the county, there are certain conventions over who pays title insurance. Now, you might be in a certain state or moving out of the area, or maybe moving in, still remaining in California, but the convention in your specific county may dictate that the buyer pays that. So here in Santa Clara County, it is customary for the seller to be paying the escrow fee and the title insurance. Now, outside of Santa Clara, in some of the neighboring counties, such as Alameda County or San Mateo County, the buyer typically takes care of the escrow fee and title insurance. So you can see this is a convention that follows the county, and it's not consistent across every county or area of California. Transfer taxes. So typically there are 2 types of transfer taxes. There are county transfer taxes and there are city transfer taxes. And I'll get into more specifics on how much those are on a later slide. And then other costs that you might be incurring are things like pre-inspections, home warranty. Sometimes the buyer pays that, or sometimes the buyer requests that the seller pay that. And of course, other reports such as the natural hazard report. So how do we estimate the home selling costs, right? So commissions we already know because you negotiate that with your agent, but the additional closing costs, the ones that we just went through, a good rule of thumb is to just multiply your sales price by about 0.5%. This will cover the escrow fee, the title insurance, and the transfer taxes. Now, getting back to the idea of transfer taxes, the county transfer tax across the board is usually $1.10 for every $1,000, right? And this is exclusively paid or customarily paid by the seller. If your city has a city transfer tax, and there are only 3 cities here in Santa Clara County that do, that's San Jose, that's Palo Alto, and Mountain View, it's typically $3.30 for every 1,000, but it's split between buyer and seller. So typically you're going to be paying $1.65 per every $1,000. Now, if you live in San Jose, there's a little bit of a difference there, because if you sell your home for a certain amount, such as over $2 million and over $5 million, this increases, right? So depending upon your price point in San Jose, you might want to take a look at what that city transfer tax schedule looks like, right? And then what can you expect to pay for certain inspections? So those pre-inspections that we talked about, property, termite, and roof inspection, typically expect to pay around $1,000, maybe around $1,100. Things have kind of gone up in the last year. Home warranty, somewhere between $700 to $500 if it's a single family home. If it's a condo or a townhome, maybe closer to say $500. A natural hazard report, that's going to be about $100. Some places are a little bit cheaper, some places are a little bit more, but basically they offer the same information. Now, should I get my home pre-inspected before selling? And the simple answer to this is yes. So one of the things that you need to understand about our market, because it moves so quickly, there's a lot of instances where we're going to receive multiple offers. And also buyers are expecting to see these inspection reports because all the other properties that are for sale in the market are offering these. So if you don't offer these inspections up front, buyers might be a little bit surprised and they might feel like something could be wrong, right? But the benefit of having your inspections done up front is that you can repair some of the items that may come up and may affect, the value or perception of your property, right? Also, you can avoid cancellations or renegotiations during escrow if you provide all this information up front. This makes for a smoother transaction and also a more secure transaction that won't fall through, all right? Also, it increases your chances of selling your home as is and not having to make any repairs. Now, which inspections do you need? I'm going to just reiterate again. The general property inspection, they're just going to go through the house, look at all the home's systems like the water heater, the furnace, AC, electrical panel, test out some of the plugs, determine if the system is grounded or not grounded. They'll look at water flow, they'll look at if there's any leaks, and they're just going to basically do a visual inspection of the house and test some of the systems. Termite inspection, they're looking specifically for what they consider wood-destroying organisms. These are things like termites, could be carpenter ants, could be carpenter bees, could be beetles, and in a lot of cases it could just be fungus or dry rot, right? So they're looking specifically for these items. And a roof inspection, which is basically someone that's going to evaluate the current condition of the roof, estimate the remaining time or life of that roof, and perhaps make some comments or quotes about repairs that can be done to that roof to make it watertight, right? So other inspections that you may want to consider might be a pool inspection if you happen to have a pool, or chimney inspection or foundation inspection. These are inspections that I typically will have if needed. In other words, if the property inspector goes to the house and he determines that there's something wrong with the chimney, maybe the chimney is moving excessively, then I'll have a separate chimney inspection just so we can get a better estimate on what the repair would be. And of course, a foundation inspection, it would be something if the property inspection, in the property inspection, there's something found on the foundation that could indicate that there could be a bigger problem or a more expensive problem. It's ideal to have a professional come in there and give us an idea of what the cost would be to remedy that issue. How to choose your real estate agent. Now, typically people, when they're choosing the real estate agent, they could get a referral from a friend. They may go with the neighborhood or area expert. They might have a family member or an acquaintance, but there's also some homeowners that are searching online and using some of these tools online to find the agent for them. And these are websites such as Zillow, Fast Expert, HomeLight, Clever, My Agent Finder. There's dozens of these websites that are out there that'll claim to find the best agent for you. But here's something about these websites. What they're doing is they're finding an agent that has paid them or agreed to a contract where if the website puts them in touch with you and they sell your home, they will get a certain percentage from the sale. And that percentage might be something like 25 or 30%, depending on the company. So you're really not necessarily getting the best agent. You're just getting the agent that they have an agreement with, And the other downside about this is if you're truly trying to get the best deal you can in terms of commission, well, if you choose one of these sites and this agent agrees to that referral fee or that finder's fee, then they have to pay 30% of their commission, and therefore it's going to be harder for them to be more, I guess, aggressive or more lenient on what they charge you, right? So just be aware of these sites, how they make their money, and how they could impact, your experience with your agent. Okay, so some important details to consider when you're picking your agent. It's, I think, personally really important to make sure that they understand your local market, right? So, and in markets, for instance, like Santa Clara, I consider Santa Clara to be a pretty diverse market. A lot of the homes were built around the same time, but there's a lot of different tracts in Santa Clara within a small space, and they could vary greatly. So someone who doesn't know Santa Clara very well might be comparing your home to lesser homes or better homes and coming up with valuations that are not accurate, setting the wrong expectations, and potentially selling your home for less than what it could sell for, right? So using someone that knows your market will give you better expectations and more accurate expectations on price, right? So when you do interview agents, you're going to request a market analysis, and you're going to be able to see what homes they've picked, and you'll be able to determine whether or not these homes truly resemble your home and reflect what your home could be worth, right? You'll want to check their recent sales history, and you'll want to see how many homes they've sold in the area, and if those are similar type of properties. If they're agents that are selling a lot of condos or townhomes and you own a single family home, well, they may not have the experience to handle your sale as well, right? And then lastly, you want to check their sales history to see, are they able to sell their homes within a good time period? Within, say, 1 to 2 weeks. Are they getting, at list price or above list price? Or are they getting lower than list price? Are their listings sitting on the market, for 2-3 weeks and having price reductions? This is going to help you understand how good they are at selling their properties and how accurate they are at giving you the correct valuation. The last thing you want to do, and I'm going to go into my next slide, is last thing you want to do is choose an agent that promises you a high price, maybe higher than what other agents are telling you, but they don't have the data to support it, right? So you want to be cautious of those agents. You want to be really weary if someone comes in and gives you a really high price and no one else has kind of gone in there. You want to take a step back and do a little bit more research to make sure that this is the right agent and their information makes sense. Now, you also want to be careful of agents that just don't have a lot of experience listing homes for sale. There's not a lot of benefit to working with these agents. They may not have the proper resources and the experience to protect you with the disclosures and everything else. If they don't know your local area, they could end up making a mistake. So it's good to use people who are familiar with your local area. You're bound to get better information from them. Of course, if they don't have a reliable track record, that's also another red flag. And then, of course, there's a lot of online reviews. Should you be trusting those reviews? Well, from what I can see out there with online reviews, it seems like a lot of agents have at least 4 to 5 stars on the reviews. I'm one of them. I think people are more apt to write good reviews for their agents more than they are to write negative reviews. So I'm not sure you're going to be able to get tons of good, honest feedback from people regarding their online reviews. But again, feel free to read through them. There might be some negative ones in there. And then when you meet that particular agent, you can determine for yourself if you feel like they're authentic. What should you do to get your home ready? Now, some people spend thousands of dollars to get their home ready. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but I'm saying that you've got to be really careful. And the things that you should be asking yourself before you start planning out these home improvements is, well, you've got to determine first, what is the current value of your home before you do anything? And then what is the value of your home, or what will the value of your home be after you make these improvements? And what are the costs of these improvements? So you'll want to kind of assess what the return on investment, or what we refer to as the ROI, would be, right? So if it's a reasonable return on investment, well, then you need to figure out how to assess the risk of that. How long is it going to take to get us from A to B? You know, is this a 1 month project? Is it a 3-month project? Is it more than a 3-month project, right? And then also take a look at the market and see where the market is. Is there any risk that the market might shift in that time frame, right? Now, this is maybe hard to do. It's hard to predict what's going to happen with the market. But of course, the longer the time period, the more risk that you're going to be opening yourself up to. The other thing that you want to consider is, well, what are the costs? So if you're paying that high level of capital gains, if you're up there in that, you know, say you made $1 million or $2 million in capital gains, and you're up at the highest percentages, which are going to be over 40%, then, you know, every dollar that you're making on a return, you're actually only making 60 cents. So that might take away some of the motivation, especially if there's a good amount of risk in some of those improvements. And then one of the other things that you need to consider before you make that decision is are there any other issues on your home that could impact the value of the home outside of maybe its appearance? Things like maybe foundation problems, or maybe you have some unpermitted additions that were done, right? These are big red flags for a lot of buyers. So even though they may be impressed with the kitchen that you just put in, or, you know, the bathrooms and just the way the house looks, if they see these issues on your home, it may be enough for them to say, hey, look, I just don't want to deal with any problems. And it will negate all that money that you've invested on trying to get a better price, right? I've got a great video that goes over this process and helps you decide if it makes sense to fix up your home or just go ahead and sell it as is. Of course, I'll provide the link to that video in case you're interested. So improvements that add value, we kind of talked about these earlier. I feel right off the bat that some of the best improvements that you can make are just the finishes of the interior of the home. Things like flooring, painting, repairing any drywall, you know, replacing or adding some lighting, you know, enhancing the hardware, maybe changing some of that old, outdated, or worn out hardware with new hardware. And of course, you know, cleaning that includes interior cleaning and window cleaning. And then of any repairs that address safety issues, right? People are typically concerned if there's some issues maybe with the wiring. If you can take care of those, people will feel a lot safer that the home is in move-in condition and they could live there safely with their family, right? Now, improvements that require more consideration or the more expensive improvements, the ones that take more time, things like kitchens, bathrooms, maybe if you're thinking about doing the windows, you know, doing additions. I mean, rarely do I think that's a good idea. And of course, maybe re-permitting items that were added to the house that weren't permitted, and things like roofs, right? So all these items are big ticket, expensive items. They could sometimes take a lot of time, especially if you're waiting for windows to be ordered or delivered. So these require a lot more consideration before you make a decision to go ahead and just jump in on that kind of project. Staging, is it worth it? And what does it cost? Now, to me, staging by far is the least expensive and least intrusive way to get your home sold and get it sold for a higher price point. So staging, what it does is it demonstrates a home's potential. You know, it helps people to see the home in maybe the most ideal light that the home can be seen. Typically a lot of these homes in the area, they are older. They're not what people would consider to be the ideal home for them in terms of floor plan, but staging allows them to see how the home can be utilized, how they'll be able to live in that home. And it really helps people to make that next step and say, hey, this works for me. I want to make an offer on this home. So I definitely think staging is something that you should be considering if you're selling. And with that said, what can you expect to pay for staging? Well, staging a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in our area can run anywhere from, say, $2,000 to $4,000. And that's going to just depend on the size of the home and the quality of the staging company. Now, Staging varies quite dramatically between different staging companies, right? And some agents, they will offer staging free. In fact, that's becoming more commonplace that more agents are paying for staging. But even though it's free, I don't necessarily think that you should use it because not all staging is effective, right? And there are many cases where staging, if it's done properly, will just show the obvious flaws of a house. So for instance, if you have a small bedroom and they put too big of a bed in there, or they don't orient that bed correctly, it again draws attention to that bedroom being small. If you've got a living room that has maybe a strange layout, or maybe there's some things like a sliding glass door in a location where normally maybe a TV would go, or you'd want to put a couch. You know, if you don't stage that room properly, it's hard for the buyers to come in and imagine how they're going to be using that room. So a lot of consideration has to be given to staging in terms of what furniture to use, the style of furniture, and how that furniture needs to be placed. I've got a great video on staging called How to Stage a Home to Get Top Dollar. Again, I'll provide the link if you want to get more information and understand, you know, good, effective staging. Should I buy first, then sell, or sell, then buy? So, of course, if you're selling your home, you need another home. You may have already purchased your home, and if that's the case, great. But in a lot of cases, people need to take the money from their existing home in order to buy their next home. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. If you sell your first home, then buy, you could get, of course, a rent back, which we talked about earlier, where you're occupying the home after you close escrow for, say, 30 or 60 days. Or you can move out of your home into a short-term rental or maybe a long-term rental and eventually find the home that you want to buy, right? There's other ways of doing it as well, where you can get certain loans like a HELOC, or maybe a home equity line of credit, or maybe a bridge loan where you can take some of that equity and buy that new house and then sell your existing house, so you wouldn't have to sell first before you buy. Or there are some trade-in programs. There's a program where we offer where we'll pretty much give you the value of your home. That way that home won't count against you, and you can buy your new home and then move into your new home and then sell your existing home. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. Each way has its benefits and it has its negatives. And of course, there's risks associated with both. I've got a really great video that goes into all those details if this is a problem that you're confronting. It's called How to Buy and Sell a Home at the Same Time. Again, I'm going to go ahead and provide you the link in our follow-up email. And disclosure. So I kind of talked about disclosures earlier, but I want to, again, stress a couple things about disclosures. There's the mandatory disclosures that the state recommends, things like the transfer disclosure statement, mold disclosure, lead-based paint, natural hazards disclosure. And then, of course, there's disclosures that are designed to limit your liability. These are disclosures that are developed by the real estate boards, and their whole objective or their whole purpose in these disclosures is to make real estate as transparent as possible, so buyers understand the risks and what they're, the risks that they're assuming. And as sellers, it allows you to disclose as much as you can, so there won't be any issues in the future when the buyer moves in and they're not surprised. So there's quite a lot of paperwork in our area regarding disclosures. And when you're filling out the disclosures, it's very important that the disclosures be complete. If they're not complete, well, this can lead to other problems down the line, right? If the buyer is thinking about getting out of the deal, this is a great avenue for them to find details of the home or the disclosures that aren't disclosed well, and then exploit that and say, hey, you didn't tell me about this, and now because of that, I don't want to buy the home anymore, right? So it's really critical as a seller to make sure that your disclosures are complete. And as an agent, it's really important that an agent go over these disclosures with you. Now, as an agent, you're not a lawyer, you're not a CPA, and you're not authorized to give legal advice, but a good agent will understand the proper way to fill these out to make sure that your liability is limited. If there's any special circumstances about your property that you feel that you need to disclose that are, maybe a little hard to convey, then at that point, perhaps, we can engage in the services of a legal expert to find out the best way to do that. But normally an experienced agent will be able to go over this with you, make sure that they're complete, and then take those completed disclosures, package them all together in a disclosure package, and deliver that, or make sure that it's accessible to all the interested agents and buyers that want to make offers. So really important component. I see this quite often with some agents where they overlook this step or don't stress it enough, and the disclosures that they provide are inconsistent and also incomplete, I should say, and leaving their sellers open to liability or transactions that could fall through. So what do you need to disclose? Well, again, kind of went over this in the previous slide. You want to make sure that you go through the disclosure with your agents. You want to make sure that they're complete. You don't want to use language that's inaccurate. So if there was a problem, say that there was a roof leak on the house last year, and then you hired a roofer to go in and repair it, and it hasn't rained since. Well, you paid the guy, he repaired it, so your assumption is it's been repaired. But then, after you sell it the following year, let's say the roof is still leaking. Well, the issue wasn't repaired, and you can imagine that that buyer is going to be really upset. So in this case, it's better to use more accurate language, such as, hey, there was a roof that was, there was a portion of the roof that was leaking. We hired someone to repair it. Here's the information, and you can say, hey, it hasn't leaked since, so we don't know if, we don't know exactly if the repair was effective or not. That is an honest disclosure, right? So you don't want to imply that things have been fixed if they haven't been fixed, because chances are something is going to come back to haunt you. All right. We did it. So we went through, we answered all those questions. I tried to be as detailed as possible, but of course, as you can see, there's a lot of steps, a lot going on. I've got these separate videos that actually go into 15 to 20 minutes on these particular topics that give you a lot more information, and I will share those with you as well. So, here's an example of what those videos will look like. I'll, of course, include them in that email. If you've got any questions or you would like to talk to me about our selling services, you've got my information. I'd be happy to talk to you. If you have a special circumstance that's affecting you and you need more clarification on any of these details, again, I'm happy to talk to you and give you the best advice that I can. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today on this webinar, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from you. Have a great day.